Welcome to Riders Range. We opened the great affordable 1911 comparison series with two classic 1911s, the Colt and the Springfield. For part two, we're going to add two more American brands, though they're much newer to the 1911 market than Colt and Springfield. For this comparison, I'm actually going to pick a winner. Will it be the Ruger or will it be the Smith & Wesson? I want to thank Ann Arbor Arms for their support of Riders Range. Ann Arbor Arms is a 5-star range and training facility with a retail and an online store, and they can be found at annarborarms.com. Yeah, the production of 1911s goes back to, well, 1911, well before World War I, and Colt and Springfield were the big dogs in that production run way back when. Smith & Wesson didn't add a 1911 to their lineup until around 2003. Ruger didn't get into the game until 2011, a century after the introduction of that particular iconic American pistol. But Smith & Wesson and Ruger are both American companies that go head-to-head on many products, so it's only fitting that they do the same in part two of our series. Before we go too much farther, I want to talk about a couple of differences here, and we'll start with the Smith. Actually, we'll talk about several differences, but all right, 1911 aficionados, you already know where we're going with this one. Hang on to your hats, and please stay tuned for the rest of the video. You're going to see a couple of things that may not be real 1911 for you. External extractor on the Smith & Wesson being one, and lo and behold, a full-length guide rod being another one. Sorry about that. It is what it is, and it's also a fairly fine pistol. I do want to mention too that both of these guns are Series 70 style. I know some of the later Smith & Wessons had the Swartz type safety, not really a Series 80 safety, but also a firing pin block safety. This E-Series does not have one. I do have a different Smith that does. So somewhere along the line they changed their production. So how about some comparisons between the two? Besides the fact they're both 70 series, they're 45, and they're full-size guns. Both guns have the Novak style sights. They're 3-dot sights, and if you watch my earlier video, you know that I'm just not a big fan of 3-dot sights. If they're night sights, I probably can live with that, but not real fond of them. But they do have slight differences actually in the sights themselves. So this particular one, by the way, is a Navy SEAL Foundation Ruger. It's a limited edition. This is one of 500 of these that were made, but it's still representative of the typical 1911 SR1911 produced by Ruger, except for the polished sides on the slide and a couple other cosmetic pieces. This is a basic, mechanically it's a basic Ruger 1911. Now, I mentioned the polished sides. Both of these guns have polished sides. Now, Ruger is polished black. The Smith & Wesson is polished stainless. The difference is on the top. You can see that they're both your basic 1911 rounded style profile, not like the ones we'll get into in part 3 of this series. But the Ruger is just that. It's a matte nitride type finish on the top of the slide. The Smith & Wesson does have a flat spot with striations on it, adds a little cosmetic flair, and allegedly cuts down on some of the glare off of that. And again, here's where you may not like them. The Smith & Wesson fish scale type of cocking serrations and forward cocking serrations, no less. Ruger just has the plain rear cocking serrations, and the markings on these actually get away from the cocking serrations if you don't like them, but there's nothing on the Smith & Wesson on the slide on the right side. Left side just has laser engraving, Smith & Wesson 1911, and it's actually not even engraving, it's just marking. The Ruger only has the gold Ruger logo on the slide. Everything else on the right side is bare, and on the left side just has fingerprints. It's the one problem with that gloss black slide, is it does get fingerprints. I will know the ejection port on the Ruger is not lowered. I mean, it is lowered, but it's not lowered quite as much as it may be on some others. On the Smith & Wesson, it's got what they call their combat profile, where it's actually lowered a little bit more in the front. But whichever profile you're looking at, how much is real and how much is gimmick, they both run fine, so I couldn't tell you one way or the other. I'm happy with either one of them. One of the thing on the Smith & Wesson, it does have a caution mark on it. Yep, got to have a billboard, and this one is cautioned that this gun is capable of firing with the magazine removed. Well, duh, it's a 1911. Neither gun has a rail. Let's see, go to the barrel, and the barrel on the Smith & Wesson is flush with the barrel bushing. That's a nice finishing touch, whereas on the Ruger, the barrel protrudes just a little bit from the barrel bushing, not quite as nicely finished, and again, that's certainly not a functional issue. It's strictly a cosmetic issue. They are pretty similar in their the fact they both have skeletonized hammers, but the hammer on the Smith & Wesson is just your, I will say typical skeletonized. Ruger's a little bit different, and I've got this on every Ruger I own. The profile of the hammer is just a little bit different, the way it's cut. And again, several Rugers, they're all the same. Differences on the frame itself. The front is part of it. Nice coarse checkering, and I don't measure lines per inch. Is it coarse? Is it fine? Does it grip or does it not grip? And on the Smith & Wesson, the checkering on the front is very grippy. I like it. I've never had any problem with wearing out my hands during an all-day shooting session. The Ruger, on the other hand, is just as smooth as could be. No checkering. Not a big fan of that. How about mainspring housing? Okay, Ruger at least checkered their mainspring housing, and it's fairly fine checkering. I haven't had any problem with slippage or anything on it. The Smith & Wesson is just as aggressive on the mainspring housing as it was on the front of the frame. Slight differences here also. Both guns have the memory bump or speed bump type of grip safety. There's some lines on the Ruger, and just plain on the Smith & Wesson. Again, certainly that's a preference issue, not a functional issue. Thumb safeties on both of these, they're almost the same profile. Nothing ambidextrous. Mag wells, now there's just a very slight beveling to the mag well on each gun here. There's certainly not actually a real beveled or flared mag well. So how do they feel in the hand? Well, I'll start with the Smith. And by the way, these guns have been safety inspected before this video. There is no magazine in the gun, and there is nothing in the chamber, so these guns are safe. And the trigger on the Smith, it's interesting that this gun does not consistently pull the same weight. It's anywhere from 4 to 5 pounds, averaging about 4.5. But as you'll see there is very little take up. There's no creep, no over travel, and this gun goes. It shoots just beautifully. I love the trigger on this gun. But again, I've measured it anywhere from 4 to 5 pounds and almost everywhere in between. So for some reason, it's not real consistent on the trigger pull, but boy, is it nice. The Ruger, on the other hand, again, no magazine and nothing in the chamber. The trigger on the Ruger, on the other hand, does have a little more take up than it does on the Smith. It's got some creep. You can feel it right in there. There's some creep. No over travel, but just that little bit of creep in there that the Smith doesn't get. But this one does measure consistently at 4 pounds all day long. Is it as nice? I don't know. Even though it's consistent at 4, the trigger on that Smith & Wesson, hard to beat that one. Factory wood grips, and although I shoot the Smith & Wesson more with a set of G10 type grips on it, the factory wood grips are nice looking. Not what I would want to carry all day for grippiness, and again, the same thing with the Ruger. I wouldn't want to carry the wood grips all day. If I'm going to be shooting this thing a lot, I want to put some tight G10s on there. Oh, I will mention too on the trigger that both Smith & Wesson and the Ruger do have over travel stops that can be adjusted, and they're set from the factory. At least they were set for me just the way they should be. You already know by watching my videos by now that I don't weigh empty guns. You can get the empty weight from all the factory specs or other videos, but I don't know of anybody who carries an empty gun, so we weigh ours loaded. Both of these guns will ship with an 8-round magazine, and the Ruger also comes with a secondary magazine that's 7 rounds. But if I load these things up with 8 rounds of 230 grain hardball, plus 1 in the chamber, then the Ruger weighs out at 45.5 ounces, the Smith & Wesson at 45.8. So there's 0.3 of an ounce difference between the two. That's nothing that I would ever get excited about. How do they shoot though? Well, the Ruger puts some pretty good groups at 15 yards using, again, this is, I believe it was Remington hardball 230 grain. Shoots just a little bit to the left of center. The Smith & Wesson is just a phenomenal shooter. Except for disregard the one flyer on the target here, but if you disregard that one, the other rounds are all right there where they should be. Again, just a hair high left. It could have been the sunlight that day, but I like the way it groups. And I've put more than 2,000 rounds out of the Smith & Wesson so far, and it's been a phenomenal shooter all the way. I put about 200 rounds out of the Ruger so far, and again, I haven't had any problems. No complaints at all on how it works. At 50 yards, the Ruger is okay. But for some reason it just doesn't work as well for me at 50 yards as the Smith & Wesson does. Smith & Wesson, I'm real happy with that. As long as I do my part, it does its part. And one thing that makes the difference on this is the sights. And you can't really see them in the video, but the sight distance, the sight front blades are about the same width on both. The rear notch though on the Ruger is a little bit wider than the rear notch on the Smith & Wesson. That gives a little better contrast for quick shooting, but it also allows more light space on each side of that front sight, which means the accuracy at 50 yards, I gotta concentrate on it even more. Now the 3-dot sights can be very distracting, and on the Smith, with the very similar sizes between the front and the rear notch, the contrast of those 3-dot sights makes it a little harder to pick up, but yet it still works well at 50 yards. They're priced pretty close to the same. The Ruger has a manufacturer suggested retail price of $939. You can find them new pretty much all day long for $750 give or take. This particular Navy SEAL Foundation one, they're hard to find. The last one I saw online was a little over $1,000. Used prices on a regular Ruger SR1911 is going to be in the $650 range, give or take. The Smith & Wesson, on the other hand, is going to start out at just $40 more than the Ruger at $979. Yet their street prices, what you're going to pay at your average retail purchase for or online purchase for the Smith & Wesson, is going to be around the $850 mark, give or take. So there's not a huge discount on the Smiths. And surprisingly, the ones that I'm finding on the auction sites for the used models of the Smith & Wesson E-Series are still right around that $850 price range. So what's the good and the bad? First of all, let's look at the Ruger. It's got a decent finish, at least this particular one does. The nitride finish on the frame is pretty standard on the top of the slide. Again, the nitride flat or matte finish is standard, and that's really how you're going to get most of your Rugers, either in stainless or in black nitride. This particular one with the polished slides looks pretty, but you got to wipe the fingerprints all the time. It's got a decent trigger pull weight, although as I mentioned it does have some creep. The sights are good. I like the contrast for quick shooting with that wider rear notch. And certainly the Ruger is priced right. The downsides to the Ruger though, there's no front strap checkering. That's smooth. I don't like it. If this is my only gun, I'd be putting skateboard tape or something on it to tighten up that grip on the front. It does have creep in the trigger. There's the extra glitz on the Navy SEAL Foundation, but otherwise it's a rather plain gun. The Smith & Wesson has nice fit and finish. It's got an excellent ability to grip the frame on it with the checkering, that force checkering on the front and the rear. The front cocking serrations, okay, this is all strictly aesthetic and personal opinion on it, but if you want front cocking serrations, Smith & Wesson has them, the Ruger doesn't. And the fish scales, well, again, that's a matter of taste. Very, very nice trigger, even though it's not consistent in weight, as I mentioned before. It is accurate. Very happy with that, and it's a good value. Although $850 street price for newer used versus $750 to $650 for the standard 1911 Ruger. Smith & Wesson is going to be a little bit more. So that's the downside also on the Smith & Wesson is, to me, the contrast between the front and the rear sight, particularly the width of those, and how it presents in that 3-dot. I'm just not fond of it. Some people are not fond at all of the external extractor, although this thing has run 100%, and different schools of thought on internal versus external, and maybe someday we'll do a video on those, but I've got guns with both and have never had any problems with them. I really don't like the billboard for the caution can be fired with the magazine removed on the Smith & Wesson. But other than that, it's a good gun. So there's a winner. Sorry, Ruger. Smith & Wesson has this one. And you may pay a little bit more for it, but the features, the better grip, the better feeling trigger, despite the inconsistent pull weight, the accuracy, despite the sights, which I just don't like. In my not always so humble opinion, the Smith & Wesson is a better overall value. Part 3 of the great affordable 1911 comparison series. We're going to look at 2 more 1911s. We're going to go offshore for those. Both of those are going to be from Sig Sauer. So you want to be notified when that video comes up. Make sure you subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and we appreciate a thumbs up on all of our videos if you like them. And if you find issues that you want to address on the videos, please comment. And thanks for visiting Riders Range.